Coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, the offseason rolls on, the names roll in. That plus a whole lot more comes up on Wednesday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, January 10th, 2024.
Just win. Just win. Just win. Just win.
The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun. He'll knock you round and upside down and laugh when he's conquered and won. And won. And won. And won. And won.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts to get the latest edition of the show as soon as it becomes available. As always, you're checking us out on YouTube. We definitely appreciate you. Matter of fact, we appreciate you in a major way. It's big how big the YouTube page has grown. Of course, the show has grown on YouTube because of my man Ari, who does a great job each and every day making sure we're up on YouTube. You can hit him up on Twitter at Ari Producers. You can hit me up as well at your boy Q254. And we got the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line at 707-654-4693. We'll get your calls and texts coming up in segment number 3. Again, a lot of feedback to try to get to, so we'll get as many calls and texts as possible coming up in segment number 3. Segment number 2, we're going to talk about Antonio Pierce and the fact that the Raider way may rub others outside of the Raiders the wrong way. What do I mean by that? That'll come up in segment number 2. Here in segment number 1, news and notes of the day, as I always do, as the offseason rolls on for the Raiders. Of course, it's Super Wildcard Weekend is coming up for the league, the rest of the league that is actually in the playoffs. But for the Raiders, it is officially the offseason. So we'll get to that after I tell you about the title sponsor of today's show, which is Jase Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jase case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50-plus infections. Get yours today at jasemedical.com. Use the code LOCKEDON, all one word, to get $20 off your order. That's JASE medical.com. Now, off top, the Raiders continue to request for interviews for potential GM openings and guys that may not be employed currently. They're also talking to try to bring in and do these interviews for their open GM position, and that could be for the actual GM position. It could end up leading to something else like a president or head of football operations. Who knows? It could be an assistant GM position, similar to what Champ Kelly was when he was hired to be the assistant GM under Dave Ziegler. There's a whole lot of reasons to conduct these interviews, but there are some names that I rolled out on Tuesday's show. There's a new name to add to it as well, and that's former Chargers GM Tom Telesco. And I know you're going to say, what? Did he just get fired? Aren't the Chargers that team that never really gets it right? That team that has so high of expectations each and every year and they fall short? Why in the hell would you want to interview with him? Well, he has had a very talented roster, which is one of the reasons why everyone scratches their heads like, what's wrong with those guys? They are a very talented team. They have a lot of talent on the roster. They just haven't been able to develop it. So he's been able to orchestrate the talent, put it there on the roster. He's given the team really good ingredients to make the really good dinner. It just hasn't come out that way. It's basically like you got the best of the best when it comes to the groceries, and the chef or the cook or whoever the case may be don't know what they're doing in the kitchen. They're basically like me in the kitchen, right? Where I'm not worth the salt. I can clean up the kitchen. I can't cook in the kitchen, right? I ain't doing no cooking. What I'm doing, I'm taking you out to eat. You know, that's just as simple as it is. If it comes up to, hey, Q, we need you to make a really great dinner tonight. Okay, cool. I'll make a reservation. No problem. That's how I get down. But that seems like what's going on with the Chargers. They got all the finest ingredients, and they can't cook worth a lick. So Tom Telesco is a guy that the Raiders have reached out to, and he's going to actually interview for the Raiders' vacant GM job. So who knows what comes of that, but that's just one of the many names that the Raiders have reached out and inquired about. I mentioned on Tuesday, Bengals senior personnel executive Trey Brown. Also, they requested an interview with him. They also, how about the Bills director of player personnel, Terrence Gray? Also, Colts assistant GM Ed Dodds, and then 49ers assistant GM Adam Peters. All those guys are being talked about as far as potential GM opening for the Silver and Black. And all of these interviews might all happen, and it all might, at the end of the day, come down to Champ Kelly. They might decide, you know what, Champ Kelly is the best guy for the job, but right now they're doing their due diligence, and I think that that's a smart thing to go ahead and cast the net really wide, talk to all these different guys while you still have the time, while there's no hires being made. You know, as soon as hires start being made, then all of a sudden you've got to make a decision. because then all of a sudden the pool of names is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. So right now they have an opportunity to talk to as many people as they want to, but the latest name is former Chargers GM Tom Telesco. Again, he orchestrated a very talented roster with the Chargers. It just didn't turn to fruition as far as coming out on top where they wanted it to be, and never developed into the team that they thought it was going to be. Also, every Tuesday I have John McClain from Sports Radio 610 joins my radio show, Unnecessary Roughness, on Radio Nation Radio 920. We scatter shoot. We talk all things NFL, but the Texans, they won the AFC South after the Jaguars lost on Sunday last weekend against, who did they play? Oh, the Tennessee Titans, who, oh, by the way, fired their head coach, Mike Vrabel, which was kind of a surprise. He's a guy that I thought if he was not going to be in Tennessee, was probably going to get traded to the Patriots. He did not. He got fired. So there's another really talented head coach out there that could be available. So I think that the biggest names out there as far as the Raiders are concerned, obviously Jim Harbaugh, obviously Antonio Pierce, and I would say you got to throw Mike Vrabel in the mix as well. And if the Raiders are smart, I think they should reach out to him and at least talk to him. Pick his brain. He's a really good head coach. He's another guy similar to Jim Harbaugh and AP that can get through to the players. He can communicate with the players. And, I mean, he's done some really good things in Tennessee. I know the last couple seasons hasn't been great, but I think Mike Vrabel is still a really good head coach. So I think that that's another name to kind of watch out for that the Raiders will probably at least kick the tires on and talk to him at some point. But getting back to the conversation with John McClain, I had to ask him about the Houston Texans because, well, they are the AFC South champs, right? It's the first year with DeMeco Ryans as the head coach, first year with C.J. Stroud as the quarterback. So I asked him about DeMeco Ryans in particular. I kind of look at DeMeco and look at Antonio Pierce and feel like I see similarities there. I know DeMeco's been, a top coordinator for longer than Antonio Pierce has, but I see the same qualities. DeMeco hitting the right buttons, Antonio hitting the right buttons. So I asked John, what is it about DeMeco Ryans? How in the world does he hit the right buttons, get the most out of his players? Here's my question, and you'll hear his answer, and it leads to a topic, or it leads to a conversation about Antonio Pierce. Check it out.
He was a first-year head coach. He was a coordinator 2 years, and he wanted to work with an experienced personnel guy. And I did a column today on sportsradio610.com, no paywall, about the McNair family and Caserio and Ryans and how they run this team. And so Nick Caserio had 22 years as a personnel guy. DeMeco gets a big say in personnel, and even though Caserio has final say, a head coach, a rookie head coach, has got to have an experienced guy with him making those personnel decisions. Then he's got to win the locker room. He's got to inspire them. He's got to lead them. And one of the ways you do it is by being honest. You don't tell a player what he wants to hear. You certainly don't lie to him. And Antonio Pierce played long enough to know that. And it's obvious he has the locker room. And I'm guessing, unless Mark Davis can hit a grand slam with somebody like Jim Harbaugh, or maybe Bill Belichick, that Antonio Pierce will get that job. But I'm sure he wants to shop around, and that's his prerogative, of course. But maybe he learned his lesson when he went for the grand slam with Ziegler and McDaniels and did that backward, let the head coach bring in the GM and their best buddies. I don't think you can have them as best buddies. You got to be able to disagree. You can argue, you can fight. It's like your marriage, but you can't let it be personal. And it's got to be professional. And I think that's how it's worked out with DeMeco Ryans. The players love him. I see a lot of things here when I see it, Antonio Pierce, the way the fans and the players are celebrating him. And I tell you what, if Mark Davis goes in another direction, I think it's pretty obvious Antonio Pierce is going to be a head coach for somebody.
So there it is right there, John McClain. I like to bring, little snippets of our conversations to the podcast because, again, he brought up Antonio Pierce. I didn't go there and ask him about him. I asked him about Antonio Pierce quite a bit, but I haven't the last couple of weeks. But the last couple of weeks, he's brought him up without me saying anything. But similar to what I said about the similarities between DeMeco Ryans and Antonio Pierce, and from a distance, John McClain is seeing the same thing. And he said what I've been saying. I don't think it's going to be long for Antonio Pierce is a head coach, whether it's with the Raiders in the NFL or another team. He will be sooner rather than later. I did see a report out of New York that the Giants are interested in him to be the defensive coordinator if he does not get the head coaching job with the Raiders. Of course, Wink Martindale is no longer there with the Giants. They decided to get out of there. He resigned. Him and Brian Daboll weren't on the same page. And, of course, Antonio Pierce played for the New York Football Giants. They see what he's able to do, and so they're very interested in his services as a defensive coordinator. And again, that'll just be a short stay. If he goes to New York as a defensive coordinator, it won't be long before he is a head coach. I promise you, just like John McClain said, it won't take long for Antonio Pierce to become a head coach in the National Football League. But how come we're not hearing about him as a potential head coach right now? Could it be the Raider way? Could it be rubbing folks the wrong way? We'll talk about that coming up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. And we'll get to that after I tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is Jase Medical and the Jase case. And, of course, we come to sports to escape from some of the crazy realities of real life, right? I know I do. But we can talk about preparing for real life. According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade, which is very scary. I can't imagine a more helpless feeling than if, a significant other, a parent, a child, one of someone that you're really close to all of a sudden got sick while a supply chain issue kept them from the life-saving medication that they needed. Well, thankfully, we'll be all right because of Jase Medical. The Jase case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, skin infections, and a lot more. This stuff could happen to any of us. Visit jasemedical.com. Complete your physician encounter. It'll be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jasemedical.com and use the offer code LOCKEDON. It's all one word to get $20 off your order. I also want to tell you about PrizePicks, and PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. The easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports, you against the numbers. You're not battling thousands of other players, pros, sharks, none of that. You pick more than or less than 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you watch the winnings roll in just like that. And I'll tell you, there's so many different things and so many different options that PrizePicks offers, like a reboot policy. Your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and doesn't come back in the second, that player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. They have quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of player and stat types are what make PrizePicks the number one daily fantasy sports app. PrizePicks offers weekly promotions that could lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, PrizePicks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value. What you need to do is go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Want to talk about Antonio Pierce, the Raiders way, and how that may rub some folks the wrong way. Where did I come up with this? Well, I mentioned already that the Giants have some interest in Antonio Pierce if he does not get the head coaching job with the Silver and Black. You heard John McClain say that, if Mark Davis does not hire Antonio Pierce, he'll be a head coach in the league sooner rather than later. So why aren't we hearing his name associated with any of the head coaching openings right now? One, I'll say this. I think he's a little young in the game, to be associated with a bunch of the names. Obviously, he's got the familiarity there with the Raiders because he was the interim coach. And as he said, his resume is on the grass. He had 9 weeks with the team. So that's why it's easier to say, okay, he could be the coach of the Raiders and then maybe potentially a defensive coordinator with the Giants. And maybe that'll be a year or two or any other team, right? And then all of a sudden he transitions into a head coaching position. But Mike Garafolo from NFL Network, he was on with Steve Weish and others, and he had an interesting comment and thought when Steve Weish asked him that exact question about why aren't we hearing Antonio Pierce's name associated with other head coaching openings in the NFL. Check it out.
If he doesn't get the job there, and we know he's in the running, how come we're not hearing any requests for interviews for Antonio Pierce? Because he seems like someone who this year has got his locker room behind him, and he won some ball games.
Yeah, well, he's a little bit outside the box because he came from linebackers coach right through being a coordinator. Mark Davis said he was intrigued by the idea. He also came in and said, I'm going to do the full Raiders thing, right? That's me. That's who I am. He's genuine about it.
Great point.
And so it's going to rub people the wrong way. Look, Steve, am I going to have to speak in code on this one? I just might have to. That's going to rub some people the wrong way, or he's not going to be many people's idea of what a head coach should act like, right? But you know what? Sometimes out-of-the-box thinking and out-of-the-box hires. I mean, Mike McDaniel, that hire down in Miami, that's not the idea of what a head coach looks like or acts like or anything to that end. And he's done a phenomenal job so far. So sometimes you got to think like, hey, maybe we don't have to keep looking for that cookie cutter idea of a head coach that we've had for a number of years. But it's also the right fit. So to answer your question, why are we not hearing those interviews elsewhere and what happens? If he doesn't get the Raiders job, obviously he wouldn't remain on the staff because the new coach wouldn't want that looking over his shoulder. I get that. He's still a great football mind. It's not to say that he's just this personality. I mean, when he was a player, we talked about him as a coach on the field. He's got a great grasp of the X's and O's. I think he'll make a terrific assistant coach and maybe even a coordinator at some point to maybe rebuild the resume for another chance down the line. But everything right now is geared toward him getting that job right now with the Vegas Raiders.
So interesting stuff right there that they're talking about, doing things the Raider way, doing things, the unconventional way, not the way that you see the rest of the league. And first of all, I think that that's refreshing. I'm glad that Antonio Pierce is not cookie cutter. Is not the same type of head coach as a lot of the head coaches around the league. You heard Garofalo right there talk about, Mike McDaniel in Miami with the Dolphins. Obviously, he's a different dude, right? I could talk about Dan Campbell. Let's talk about Dan Campbell. I mean, when I'm hearing Garofalo say about Antonio Pierce, and again, if no one hires him outside of the Raiders as a head coach this year, I wouldn't sit there and say, well, he's, they're discriminating against him or anything like that. Like, I wouldn't go there, but it's just funny to hear the explanation, and that's why I'm really talking about it, right? I mean, I expect, like I said, him to be a head coach sooner rather than later, but when I hear the breakdown, all I could think of is Dan Campbell. And remember, Dan Campbell was actually interim head coach with the Dolphins back in 2015 after they fired Joe Philbin. They got off to a 1-3 start and then won in the 2015 season, and Dan Campbell went 5-7 down the stretch, and he was not retained in 2015. And then he resurfaced with the Lions when he was named the head coach in 2021. Matter of fact, I'm hearing Garofalo talk about Antonio Pierce and doing things his way and, just kind of having that old Raider swag to him. And all I could think back to is Dan Campbell at his introductory press conference when he said, and I quote, "This team is going to take on the identity of the city, and the city's been down and has found a way to get up. This team's going to be built on. We're going to kick you in the teeth. We're going to get knocked down, and on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off. Before long, we're going to be the last one standing. Any loss that we take, we're going to feel the full pain from it and not be numb to it," end quote. That's Dan Campbell when he was introduced, right, to the Lions media. And I remember even hearing that and thinking, oh, this is going to end up bad in Detroit, right? So, a lot of folks thought it wasn't going to be good, right? I was one of the last people to get on the Lions party. I didn't think, okay, this team's not really going to be good. I know they had a little momentum towards the end of the season, but that's not going to carry over to the next year. Well, you see what they did this year. They went out and won the NFC North, right? That's the first time they've ever done that in the history of the NFC North. Last time they won the division, it was the NFC Central. It was 30 years ago. Tag team, whoop, there it is, was a hit on the charts. Matter of fact, it was a top hit, like top 2 hit on the charts at the time. And we all know, and if you don't remember tag team, whoop, there it is, that's how young you are, right? But and all of us that know, all of us old heads, as they'd say, that know that was a long time ago, the last time that they were the champions of the division. They're going to be hosting, matter of fact, they're hosting their former quarterback, Matt Stafford, this upcoming weekend for Super Wildcard Weekend, and that's all under Dan Campbell's watch. D'Amico Ryans, I mentioned him with the Houston Texans. He's a defensive-minded coach, right? I mean, a lot of folks say you got to have a defensive-minded coach, or you're offensive-minded coach, you can't have a defensive-minded guy. D'Amico Ryans is defensive-minded, and he's got a really good quarterback in C.J. Stroud, a rookie. If I'm Antonio Pierce, I go into Mark Davis and say, look, see what they're doing in Houston? You see that they just won the division with a guy that gets through to the players, a guy that pushes the right buttons, a guy that they understand, a guy that could relate to the guys in the locker room. And, oh, by the way, a game-changing quarterback, we could do the same thing. We've got game-changing players. Devontae Adams is a game-changing player. Josh Jacobs, they bring him back. He's a game-changing player. Jacoby Myers has been proven to be a game-changer across from Devontae. Obviously, they got game-changers on the defensive side of things with Max Crosby, right? Nate Hobbs is starting to show to be that guy. Can Tyree Wilson develop into that guy? Well, we'll see, right? It's too early. Malcolm Kuntz, he's showing what he can do. They've got players to get it done. All they got to do is take the same blueprint that DeMeco Ryans is using in Houston, Dan Campbell is using in Detroit, and that should be his presentation as far as I'm concerned when he sits down with Mark Davis. Those examples of what's going on there, plus the example of what I was able to do the 9 weeks as the interim head coach here, should be all you need to know and all you need to see to know that I could be the right guy. And if he could prove that and convince the Raiders that all I need is to go out and get a dynamic quarterback, if that's who they believe that they need. If they don't, if he believes that I can get it done with Aiden O'Connell, he's been my guy for the last 9 games, he can be my guy moving forward, then that's on him. If it's my money, I'm going to say that, you need to get a younger quarterback with some mobility. I think that that's something that you need to have. But at the very least, you got to just revamp that quarterback room anyway. So go ahead and get you some more talent, bring it into the quarterback room, and let them battle it out, right? If you trade up and go get your guy because you believe that he's going to be that game changer, like say they follow my hope and they go and get Jaden Daniels. If they do that and they give up some draft capital to go move up and go get him, and he battles it out with Aiden O'Connell in training camp, and Aiden O'Connell just happens to win that competition, then so be it, right? Then he holds on to the job, and if he still proves to be that guy, cool, no doubt, let it rock. If not, then Jaden Daniels got the spot, and you got a really good backup in Aiden O'Connell, who's already proven he can win you some games in the National Football League. But I thought that was a funny explanation and breakdown, and I'm trying to get Garofalo on my radio show, Unnecessary Roughness, on Radio Nation Radio 920, to break it down a little bit more and just kind of go into great detail. But it's funny that the Raider way or the unconventional way, something that's not cookie cutter, it seemed as like a bad thing across the National Football League, and part of the reasons why a lot of the teams aren't talking about Antonio Pierce. Again, I thought it was more just an experience thing, but guys like Garofalo, they're all over the NFL, so they're talking to a lot more people than I am. I'm just watching from a distance, observing, and bringing my thoughts to the show, whether it's the radio, the podcast, whatever the case may be. But I thought you'd find that pretty interesting. I know I did. But perfect examples of what Antonio Pierce could potentially be with the Raiders if he's trying to make his case for Mark Davis. Look at DeMeco Ryans and C.J. Stroud in Houston, Dan Campbell and Jared Goff in Detroit. There's obviously more. Mike Vrabel, until he got fired on Tuesday, I think he was a great example of the guy that can get through to his team and get the most out of them as well. And there's others that are out there, as well. But those are some examples that I think that Antonio Pierce could bring to the table and say, this is what I can do. I just need the right pieces to get it done. So that's all I got for you for segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Coming up with segment number 3, your calls and texts throughout that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. And we'll do that coming up in segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we do that, though, I do want to let you know that this show is being brought to you in part by BetterHelp. And sometimes life hits you like a ton of bricks. Sometimes you don't really know what to do, right? You get in a situation that you didn't see coming, and believe me, that happens all the time. I get here in this month of January, and I start thinking about the passing of my son, and emotions start to get start to hit me. And again, you're never prepared for situations like that, and it doesn't have to be as extreme as that situation for me. It could be something minor that's just weighing heavily on your head, and you just need to figure out what to do and who to turn to. And sometimes, therapy could be the best way for you. And of course, around New Year's, we get obsessed with how to change ourselves instead of just expanding on what we're already doing. So therapy will help you find strength so you can ditch the extreme resolutions. You can make changes that really stick, and you can help get, peace of mind at times. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, get BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you got to do is fill out a brief questionnaire, get matched with a licensed therapist, and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. All you got to do is celebrate the progress you've already made. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and texts. Draft that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Got a text from the 831. It'll start things off. It says, okay, now that the blank show is over, we can get to the draft and we don't need to trade any of our picks for a quarterback. What we need is to work on our defense. As long as I've watched football, you have to have a defense to win. You can score 40 points a game and still not win it, but if you shut them out, you'll never lose. I have never seen an offense set up a defense to score, but I have seen it happen the other way around. And if we're to make any quarterback hold the ball a second longer, just think how many sacks that Mad Max and the boys could have. So my first 2 picks would be a cornerback or cornerback and a gangster linebacker that could tackle and stop the run. We don't need him to cover. We just want him to make sure that they stay in passing situations. That's a text from the 831. And I'm sorry, out of all due respect, I have to 100% disagree. Right? I just have to disagree 100%. Yes, the defense can always get better. There's no doubt. I think that, you could always add more corners. You could always add more linebackers. You could always add more beef to the defensive line. Yes, all that is valid points, but they don't have to be the first 2 picks. If you look at the offense that barely scored 20 points a game, struggled to get to 20 points just a few times this season, you tell me you don't need an addition to the offense? The hell you don't. Right? Again, with all due respect, the hell you don't. You need to fix something. It needs to get jump-started. There's something wrong with the offense when you got as much talent as they have. No, it doesn't have to score 40 points a game. They could score 24, 25. The Raiders' defense only averaged giving up about 16 or 17 a game. So I'd be good with that, but they've got to be able to score at least 20 consistently. Give me 24 consistently, as a matter of fact. With Devontae, Jacoby, Josh Jacobs, Zamir White, guys like that, and you can't get 24 points, yeah, you got to be able to do something. You got to bolster the offensive line and continue to improve that. And me personally, I think the quarterback play needs to be better. But that's just me. But if you don't think that you need to address the offense at all, you're not seeing the same thing everybody else is seeing, right? I think you need to go back and check out the film because, man, the offense, there's no doubt, needs work. Defense, continue to build? Absolutely. Offense, leave it alone? Nah, you got to build that up. You got to do something to it. But thanks for the text. I do appreciate you. Up next, got a call from Raider Big C in L.A. Actually, I got to meet him at Allegiant Stadium on Sunday. He's calling to talk about being at the last game here in Vegas and the vibe he felt from the game, the fan base, and more. It was just a little different feeling, according to Raider Big C in L.A. Here he is.
Hey, Q. It's Raider Big C from L.A. Just want to say it's great to finally meet you in person. That's kind of like my dream come true, I'm not going to lie. My wife did say next time I get an autograph from you, she really loves your voice. So I'm like, I got you. But I wanted to chime on one thing. I've noticed a couple things when I've gone to Vegas to watch a game. And on Sunday, the first time I can actually say that it felt like, back in Oakland. The vibe was just different. AP brings something to this organization that's been missing since the Oakland days. And even back in the LA days. But it just feels different. You can see people partying, having fun. You can feel the energy. And I feel that AP is the man. That Raider swag is coming back. And I just saw it. It's a whole different beast. I see it when I got to the games. I see it when they play the Jets. I see it last year when I was at the Colts game. You can feel the difference in the building. But that's my 2 cents. Again, it's a pleasure meeting you. Such a great person. Looking forward for another great season coming up. Raider Big C from LA out.
Thanks for the call, and it was good to meet you, man. I appreciate the time. And, the vibe that you mentioned, that's what AP wants. He's talked about it a bunch of times. He's talked about Allegiant Stadium being the Death Star, being Raiders' home field, want to have that place rocking. I mean, he talked about that on November 1st when him and Champ Kelly was introduced as the interim GM and the interim head coach. And they've talked about it, and he talked about it in particular the whole time. And he even said after that game on Sunday against Denver that was one that really felt like a Raider home game. And it's been very rare that that's been said. But it was said, following that game, and it's good. And the Raiders need to get back to that, right? It's always going to be a little bit different because it's Vegas, and there's always going to be people that want to come. So there's always going to be fans of the other team. But it did have the vibe of a Raider home game. And there's been a few of those now this season that have really, truly had that vibe of that Raider home game, and they need to continue to build on that. And I love the fact that AP acknowledges it, talks about it, and is trying to get that back. to where it needs to be. And, hearing the fans chant AP, AP, AP as they walk off the field and run off the field, thought that was cool. And obviously it meant a lot to him. But thanks for the call, my man. I do appreciate you. Up next, got a text from KD out of NC. Says, hey, Q, my only worry with hiring Harbaugh is that he'll want total control or final say, much like Gruden with Mayock or McDaniels with Ziegler, instead of it being a working relationship. I've seen it fail too often when coaches have all the power. Interested to get your thoughts. Would this be an issue with Harbaugh, or would he be willing to give the final say to someone like Ed Dodds? Thanks for all that you do for the nation, KD from NC, and thanks so much. And that's my number one concern, brother. My number one concern when it comes to Jim Harbaugh. I've been saying that I'm team AP, and the reason is because I think that he could be a really good coach. And two, I don't want the head coach to have all the power that Jim Harbaugh is going to want. Everything that you just said is the number one reason why I don't want to say no to Jim Harbaugh, because I know he's a good coach, but that's why I'm very on the fence of just kind of pounding the table for him. If he ends up going somewhere else or staying in Michigan, I'm just fine with that, because again, I don't think like you that it's healthy to have that kind of power for the head coach where he's picking the GM. And you mentioned Ed Dodds. Ed Dodds is his guy. That's Jim Harbaugh's guy, right? And so last time that the Raiders interviewed Ed Dodds, everyone thought, oh, Jim Harbaugh is going to be coming to the Raiders because that's his guy. Well, they didn't hire Ed Dodds. Clearly, they didn't hire Jim Harbaugh either. But yeah, that's my concern right there. We saw Gruden with all the power. Didn't work out very well. They were still able to get some quality players, especially the later round picks, but you don't want to have that kind of structure. And even with Ziegler and McDaniels, Ziegler said that he had the final say, and McDaniels had a heavy influence on it, and that's what happens because he got hired before Dave Ziegler, so he still kind of had more of a say than probably he needed to have. But I think the head of football operations, the GM, then the head coach, that should be the order of operations. But yeah, your concerns are my concerns. So thanks so much for that. And yeah, I'm right there with you. Up next, got a call from Wine Country Raider. He's calling to talk about who he'd like to see back in a Raiders uniform in 2024, and we'll explain why. Here he is, Wine Country Raider.
What's up, Q? It's your boy, Wine Country Raider. First off, I just want to say we got to bring AP and Champ back. Now, something that probably a little too early to talk about, or maybe not, but I think we got to bring Josh Jacobs back. I think Zeus is definitely, his replacement, but I would love to see Josh Jacobs sign back on like a 2-year, maybe 3-year, you can get out of it after the second year type deal. Because Zeus is still on his rookie deal. Let them share snaps, truly share snaps. Let them two be a 1-2 punch in the backfield. And I think that it will be the case if we bring back AP. I'm worried that it's not going to happen. I guess that's just me being a skeptic. I feel like if we bring Harbaugh in, it's like this team is going to turn into a rebuild. He's not going to just take what we have and run with it. He's an outside guy. He doesn't know about these players whose names aren't that big, but we as Raider fans know who they are and know what they bring to the table. So I really hope that we bring AP back. I think we'll have a real chance to really come back next year and start punching people in the mouth with AP. I think it's not a rebuild year. I think it's just a tweak year and let's go, So that's all I got. This is Wine Country Raider. Peace out, Raider Nation.
Thank you for the call, my man. I appreciate you, and there's no doubt. You know me. You've listened to me long enough. I definitely want to see Josh Jacobs return. There's nothing more than I want to see number 8 in the backfield in 2024. I really do. That's why when he, said bye to me, made sure to go out of his way to say bye to me at the Raiders locker room on Sunday following the game, and said thanks for being down since A1 since day one. It meant something to me because I realized that Josh Jacobs might not ever be in a Raiders uniform again. I would love to see him back. I think Antonio Pierce would love to see him back, but it's going to be all about the almighty dollar. How much is he willing to pay for, right? $12 million basically is what he earned in 1 year in 2023. They're not going to give him that kind of money in 2024. If anything, they may give him a 2-year deal. Hell, maybe even a 3-year deal, right? First 2 years, $12 million maybe fully guaranteed and an option on a 30-year deal. But he's not going to make any kind of money near what he would have made if he had signed a long-term deal that Dave Ziegler and company had put on the table before his agent said, no, We don't want that deal. He could have made a lot more money than he's going to. So I don't know what he's going to be willing to pay, play for this year. But I just don't think that the money is going to be where he wants it to be. Maybe he goes out and tests free agency and doesn't get the offers that he wants, and he ends up returning to the Raiders on a reduced rate. I would love that. I don't want to shortchange a guy. I don't want to count his pockets. I don't want to say what he's worth and what he's not worth, because I want these guys to get as much money as possible. But we know what the running back situation is in the NFL, and we know what Josh Jacobs didn't produce in 2023, and that's unfortunate. But thanks so much for the call. I appreciate you, and I'm with you. Would love to see JJ back. I got time for one more text. How about this text from Heavy Chevy out to 510? Good morning, Q. Heavy Chevy here from the 510. First time contacting the show. Off the top, I'd like to say thank you for your commitment to excellence. Listen to your show first thing in the morning on my way to work, something I look forward to every day. I'll keep it short and sweet. I'm rooting for Coach AP and Champ Kelly, but if we cannot keep Patrick Graham or Champ Kelly, I think the Raiders should just hire Jim Harbaugh. What do you think? That's Heavy Chevy out of the 510. And it's a good way to think about it. It's a good way to look at it. The one thing I know about Jim Harbaugh, he's going to want to be recruited. He's going to be wants to be wined and dined. He wants to be wooed. He wants to be wowed. He wants to be treated like the prettiest girl at the ball, right? And so I don't know if the Raiders will give him that kind of treatment if they're trying to hold on to Patrick Graham, and then all of a sudden when they realize that they can't hold on to Patrick Graham, they decide to move on from AP and Kelly and just bring in Jim Harbaugh. Like, he's not. Let's put it like this. I guess this is the best way to put it. He doesn't want to be second choice. He's not going to be second choice. He won't go to a team where he feels like he's the second option. He wants to be the number one option. He wants to be the number one overall pick. He wants to be, like I said, the guy that the teams roll out the red carpet for. There's no doubt about that. That's who anyone who has covered him knows, his MO and what he's looking for. And that just might all lead back to Michigan when it's all said and done. He's going to want that contract similar to what Gruden had. All reports were 10 years, $100 million. I believe that there's a 10-year, $125 million deal on the table right now from Michigan. So he'll probably want more than the Gruden deal. And I don't know if that's something that the Raiders or any other team in the NFL should actually give him. But that's what I got for you. Thanks so much for that text. I do appreciate you. Thanks for being a part of the show. We don't have any time for any more calls. Tomorrow we'll get Mike in Utah. We got a text from Tadreese in New Jersey. We got Ilias from the 323. We'll get him in as well, plus more. We'll have more feedback. We'll have more information, some news and notes, and we'll have plenty of more conversation as this rolls along. The offseason continues for the Silver and Black. It's always interesting. It's never a dull moment. There's always something to talk about. We'll be doing it coming up on Thursday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. The first Thursday in a long time with no crossover edition now that the season's over. So that's going to be, a different feel. But we'll be back at it as we always are. Until tomorrow, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.